Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Carter. I am the manager of training and development at Missouri Baptist Children's Home. If you need to reach out to me for anything, there is a little raise hand button. I used to be a teacher once upon a time. I am legally and morally obligated to respond to a raised hand. It's amazing how often that will still get my attention way too quickly. Um, I'm always happy to answer questions as we go. I am going to recap a little bit from part one just to make sure we're all on the same page, though. So, one of the foundational things that we're going to talk about is the idea that traditionally speaking, the way most of us relate to each other, unfortunately, especially in the workplace, is that we actually focus on correcting primarily. Hey, this report wasn't done the right way. We're going to need you to do it this way. Hey, the way you clocked in wasn't the right way to clock in. Hey, we didn't like the way this document was done. And we do that over and over and over and over again. And then after we've kind of fixed what we don't like is going on, then we're going to give somebody some tools they need to be more successful. That's what we're using for empowerment. And then typically at the end of the day, if we have the time, the energy, or the desire left over, that's when we focus on connecting with people. Now, here we use TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, and what TBRI says is, hey, that other way, it doesn't work very well. We actually find that it doesn't help anybody anywhere for a long period of time. So what they did was they flipped it. They flipped it on its head and they said, what if? What if we try getting to know each other first? What if we start that connection piece and we start saying, hey, who are you? What are you about? Let me tell you who I am and what I'm about too. And then what we find is that that actually will help people. It'll allow them to allow us to empower them. Because then what happens is we're building trust, we're building relationship, and then they're more likely to take our tools and suggestions and actually believe us when we tell them, hey, I've got this thing that'll work. Hear me out. And then what we find, and this is really fantastic, especially as a supervisor, is that then we actually don't have to do the correcting portion nearly as often, or if we have to, it's a lot easier. I'm pretty sure most of us at some point in our professional careers can probably think of a time in our lives where we've had to be corrected. And if we didn't know the person, how did that correction feel to us? Was it maybe a little harder to deal with? I always thought so. But what if it's someone who knew us, who knew our heart, who knew what we were about, and we knew who they were and what was on their mind? How much easier was it to take a correction from them? Now, for people here who love metrics, I'm assuming a few of us here might be metric driven people. My workplace, as of 2 years ago, we've actually taken this as our initiative of this is how we train our management on how we want them to treat every single staff under them. And after that, we actually saw with this one initiative more than a 10% decrease in our turnover rate that year alone, with about another 10% the next year after we started doing this. And what we saw was we went from the number one reason anybody was listening to us or was leaving us. It was because of, and they would have put, it was because of my relationship with my supervisor or someone in my supervisory chain. That's no longer the main reason why people leave. Now they leave because of money. And as a relatively small nonprofit organization, that's more to be expected, I think. So we have data backing how well this is working for us as an agency. It's also making people happier. At the end of the day, if I have to do a correction, I'm feeling better because one, I'm not doing it as often, but two, it's because people are just taking it better in general because they know who we are. Another really in core, or another core concept of what we need to talk about is the idea that all behavior is a form of communication. Good, bad, ugly, everything everybody does. It's trying to tell us something. Now, I'm hoping I can get a couple of you to participate with me here. Because here we have something I don't think any of us enjoy dealing with at work. Hopefully, this isn't you, but I think most of us have had to deal with a coworker who would the term we would use is dysregulated, someone who's not quite at their best at the moment. So we've got regulated versus dysregulated. Someone who's dysregulated, who talks to us through a phone call, maybe in an in-person meeting, or maybe even through an email in a way we don't necessarily fully appreciate. So if anyone's willing, if I can get a person to volunteer for something here, why do you think this person's yelling into the phone this way? Who can make up a story for me? If not, I'm going to just, I might make up something really odd here.
I'll make up a story.
Fantastic. Hi.
Hi, I'm Melissa Champs. So, this guy received a phone call from a telemarketer, and he has said the same thing over and over again and does not want to purchase what they are trying to sell. And he is frustrated and is asking, please stop calling me because they keep calling.
All right. I feel like that is something that most of us can probably relate to, isn't it? Now, I'm going to, quick thing about myself. I love getting telemarketing calls because I like to mess with them. They don't call me anymore because the last one I tried to sell an extended home warranty to, and they didn't like that. I don't know. I just enjoy messing with telemarketers though. So this guy has gotten a telemarketing call. They are being insistent. They are not leaving him alone. How many times before any of us are probably going to start getting to this point in one day? My poor wife, uh, Melissa, you pointed out something brilliant. My poor wife got 10 in one day from the same telemarketer. This is about how she was feeling by the end of the day. Well, what is this person trying to communicate by the time they're getting to the point of screaming in the phone? I think they're probably frustrated because they feel unheard. Because they've said, no, I'm not interested. No, I'm not interested. No, I'm not interested. And I think a lot of us, when we get to a point, and this is something we will specifically cover later, we start feeling like when we're unheard, that we need to be defensive to help protect ourselves. So maybe this person is at that point where they're not feeling heard. They feel maybe disrespected. They feel like they're being ignored. They maybe feel like their time is wasted. So this person at that point is starting to scream into the phone. Now, here's an interesting question to add on to that. What if this is like our person in the office who's normally the quietest, calmest human being we have in our office? This would be a bit abnormal for them, wouldn't it? So then we have to start answering, or we have to start asking another really important question that we're looking for an answer for. And then we start asking the question of why. And we're not just going to ask why once, we're going to keep asking why until we get to some sort of root issue, really. So why is the like normally our calmest, quietest person in the office screaming at this telemarketer when normally they would just be able to say, "Hey, no, I'm not interested," and hang up? What if they haven't had enough sleep? What if they have something going on at home? Now, I see Antonio just linked session one in the chat there. For anyone who sees session one, well, one of the things I covered there is the idea of precipitating factors. And a precipitating factor is just what you have going on that's impacting the way you are currently behaving, anything that has an impact on your behavior. What if this person has something really rough going on at home and where we all hopefully are trying to check that at the door and not bring it into the workplace? Sometimes we can't. What if this person just lost someone really close to them? Or what if they haven't had enough sleep in days? Or what if they have, what if they're worried about their bills getting paid? Is this person then in their right mind? Or are they at that place of stability where they can deal with these sort of things as easily as they normally would? Well, probably not. I doubt any of us are at our best in any of those cases. So then we need to start saying, hey, what can we do to help this person? I'm assuming most of us don't want someone screaming in the workplace, unless you're in a workplace where that's applicable. I have questions for you if that is. But what can we do as supervisors? What can we do as a management team to help this person now feel better? So remember, everything's communication. And this is just that loud example. What if we have someone who's normally the chatty, energetic person in the office and they come in one day and they're just not talking and they're not smiling? What are they communicating to us? Or even better, has anybody, and if you want to just like do a quick show of hands for me on the hand chat or hand emote thing, or just type it into chat, who here gets people who just pops by your office unannounced to just have a chat? Is that something anybody else ever deals with? All right, there's one yes. A bunch of hands are popping up. So lots of people here. We have some we have people who randomly just pop by for a chat periodically. When was the last time we started thinking about why? Now, sometimes it's annoying, right? Hey, I'm in the middle of something. Why do I need to stop and do this? I personally love it. I like it when people come by to chat. It's nice. But how often do we start getting frustrated because we were in the middle of something, we were trying to get something done, and now we need to put this down to have this conversation? That person's trying to tell us something. What if it's just a person who's in desperate need of connection? What if it's a person who's lonely? What if it's a person who's hurting? And what if coming by to talk to you is the only way they're able to feel that human connection in that moment? If anyone's ever had that, this could have been an email moment, which I'm assuming, based off of the amount of yeses and thumbs ups and hands, a lot of us probably have. But when was the last time we said, hey, when's the last time this person just had a pleasant conversation with another human being that didn't need something from them necessarily in that moment, or wasn't a customer yelling at them or cursing at them or just whatever it may be? What if we're that lifeline for them? And I think it was starting to realize that that really turned around those moments for me personally as a supervisor, going, hey, I understand that this could have been an email, but what if that person hasn't had face-to-face interaction with another human being all day? And sometimes, so I don't know how many people here are supervisors or in some kind of management position. Sometimes I feel like as a supervisor, we see the obvious solutions. And we see that, hey, if you would just stop turning in your paperwork that way, if you would just flip your Excel sheet for this orientation, whatever it may be, it's going to be so much easier. Or, hey, I understand you're struggling with your coworker. If you would just do this, you wouldn't be struggling with that coworker anymore. But what I find is that sometimes people don't actually want us to solve the problem right then. They just need someone to listen to what they have going on. Now, I have a video here about the importance of listening and how much of an really a different impact the idea of listening can have on a person.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just.
Don't.
All right, so I know that probably seems like a rather quite silly example of what we might expect in that sort of situation. But I actually find there's a couple of really interesting things we can learn from that fairly silly minute and some change video. One, I think it's a great example of sometimes somebody really does just need us to hear what they're trying to say. And I don't just mean hear, I do mean trying to actually listen, like really listen to what they're trying to say. This lady did not want well, I'm assuming her significant other in this video, to tell her how to fix it. She just needed to be heard about her concerns and her stress. Other thing I find really interesting is that there is a typical escalation of negative behavior that we see when somebody's kind of elevating in terms of negative behavior. So we're gonna kind of take a look a little bit, and what I usually see, there's a pattern, and what we're always trying to do, hopefully every one of us, whenever we see someone starting to escalate, we always, when we see this escalation happening, want to identify that escalation is happening, pinpoint where they are in this escalation cycle, and try to do what we can to disarm it before we get to the serious stuff. So the first place we saw is she felt really anxious, right? And I think anxiety is comes from an unmet need within a person, and we not may not even be fully conscientious of what this unmet need is. It could be, you know, something is wrong. Why is my sweater messed up? Every time I try to take my sweater on or put it off, something's wrong. My head hurts. I don't understand. I'm scared. I'm frustrated. And then what we usually see is people start becoming defensive if that escalates. And defensiveness kind of has two different phases. There's low defensiveness and high defensiveness. And we started seeing that with this lady in terms of her voice started elevating and she started making some more absolute statements towards her partner. And then, fortunately, I don't feel like she got past low defensiveness. And we'll get to what all of these mean in detail over the next few slides. And then there's high defensiveness where aggression may start be perceived. We can start perceiving aggression at that point. And then there's what I like to call the storm. And I don't think a lot of us need a hard definition for what the storm is. That's our yelling, our kicking, our screaming, holes in the wall, stuff being thrown. The things we generally want to avoid happening that become really serious HR issues. So the first thing we have to do is we have to learn how to identify anxiety. So what does anxiety look like? This is what anxiety looks like. If you have seen the movie Inside Out 2, you know how terrible of a joke this is, but you know what? My toddler thinks I'm hilarious and I'll take it. So, when we're looking at communication, generally we're looking at three different parts of communication, and we go into a little more detail in part one of verbal de-escalation. But to recap, verbal is just the actual exact words that are coming out of your mouth. Paraverbal is how you're saying the words. So your tone, your pitch, your speed, uh, your volume, all of that. And then nonverbal are just the physical things that you're doing that aren't the words themselves. So what face are you making? What's your distance to the person? So on and so forth. So when we're talking about anxiety, there's kind of two different phases to anxiety that we need to think about. There's hyper arousal and then there's hypo arousal. So hyper arousal means they're getting bigger, they're getting louder. Hypo means they're kind of shrinking. Verbally, what we see at this point is if they're hyper aroused, we're just going to start hearing so many words and just they may not even always make sense. It's just a lot of words. And then paraverbally, we'll start hearing the person speed up and they start getting louder and their words start coming a little bit quicker. All of a sudden, maybe their pitch is going up and all of a sudden they're kind of sounding like a runaway freight train and they're saying they don't really seem like they know what they're doing and they're getting kind of frustrated as they go. And we start seeing that going up. And then non-verbally, we'll often see a person in that hyper arousal state. They start getting bigger. Maybe their arms are getting bigger, their gestures are getting really big, they're pacing, their legs are bouncing. If everyone knows that kind of anxious leg bounce, they're fidgeting with stuff, whatever it may be. There's just more kinetic friction happening in that moment. Well, with hypoarousal, it's almost the exact opposite. This is going to be your person who just shuts down and tries to take up less space at that point. So they're getting quieter. Maybe you can't get them to talk. Their volume is dropping. Their enunciation is probably going down. They're probably going down an octave. So this is when you get the people who are maybe avoiding trying to be heard, and they don't really want you to know what's happening. And non-verbally, they're probably avoiding your eye contact. And a lot of the time, we see people kind of shrink within the physical world around them. You know, they're bringing in their arms. They're kind of collapsing in on themselves, it looks like, as they're feeling this anxiety. So, what are we going to do when people are anxious? My number one suggestion is to start with being playful. Now, some of you probably did a double take of the screen going, what is this guy talking about? Playful engagement is one of the absolute most important core tenets of what I do for a living. I teach people playful engagement. I try playful engagement. And folks, talking to a tremendous amount of people who have been working in a fairly difficult field like I work in for the last 20 plus years, they genuinely are under the impression that more than 50% of every critical incident we have wouldn't happen if people started by being playful. And this may sound like an odd concept, but once upon a time, I used to teach incarcerated youth. And I was in some really dangerous situations that I was able to stop by just embracing kind of a goofy, silly side of myself. I have been cussed out more times than you can imagine working with angry youth sometimes. And I'll never forget uh, when I was an English teacher for incarcerated youth, I had one kid cussing me out, and I just looked at him and I went, you know, man, if you used that many adjectives on your papers, you'd be getting all A's right now in my class. And they stopped and they went, are you really trying to teach me something right now? And I went, yeah, I'm a teacher. I'm not allowed to do anything else. What do you expect? And it went from a moment where there was maybe going to be a power struggle or some kind of incident to both of us laughing. And that built our connection and that built mutual respect among us. And that happens all the time with various situations. I've often found that if you can get someone to laugh, if you can get someone to smile, that's going to help fix whatever mood's going on. Now, that's not 100% of the time, but I think people would be amazed at the power of playfulness. And I think we could probably, we could spend the rest of this time just talking about playful engagement. That's something I'm very passionate about. If you have more questions about it, I'm always happy to answer questions for that. I even here at work, we had somebody who was having a rough day and they were obviously visually having a rough day. Their shoulders were slumped. They weren't looking up. That isn't normally who they are. I had a packet of Taco Bell hot sauce in my pocket. Don't ask why. Sometimes random things happen. And I remember just walking up and going, hey, I need you to have this. And I gave them the Taco Bell hot sauce and just walked away without saying another word. And I could hear them laughing the entire time I was walking away. And the next day they came by my office and just said, thank you. I was in a really rough spot. And just that little bit of silly interaction was enough to help me get into a better place that day. But the problem is sometimes things still escalate. We can do everything we think is absolutely perfect. We've identified anxiety. We're trying to be playful to help get people out of that anxious phase, but things will escalate. And at this point, they're probably going to start being defensive. And I think a lot of the times defensiveness stems from not feeling heard. I'm pretty sure every one of us can think of a time where we felt like no one was listening to us, which as a trainer, that happens, I think, on an almost daily basis periodically. And it hurts our feelings sometimes, doesn't it? Sometimes it really bothers us. One thing I need everyone to note, though, is that defensiveness actually serves an important function within the human mind, and it's in the title of defensiveness. It's to defend, it's to protect ourselves. We're getting defensive because we're starting to hurt, and now we're wanting to be protected. So defensiveness, we're going to start with low defensiveness, and what we start noticing is verbally, there's going to be a lot more what I like to call challenging questions. So, hey, how are you going to stop me if I go do this? Or, hey, who are you to tell me I can't go do this? Or just anything that's kind of starting to question, like, how are you going to not make this happen? Who are you as an authority to prevent this thing? Paraverbally, what we're starting to notice is the words are getting a bit more of a bite to them. Maybe there's a bit more of a staccato. Oh, and who are you to try to stop me from doing this? And it's going to start sounding a bit more aggressive. And then non-verbally, a lot of the time we'll start seeing people closing off, crossing their arms, maybe kind of glaring. Maybe they're trying to start getting up to the edge of our personal bubble, depending on what that personal bubble may be. Maybe they're kind of pushing on that boundary just a little bit. Maybe they're trying to tower over us. Maybe they're leaning up against things a little bit. Just to try a little bit of intimidation to try to make themselves feel heard. Well, at this point, we've got two different things that we want to try to do. One, we really want to we still want to make sure we're maintaining connection. That's always important. But one, we actually want to firm up our voice just a little bit. And when I say using a firm voice, I think it's really important to note we don't want to get aggressive with our voice. There's a huge difference between a firm voice and an aggressive voice. When our voice is firm, instead of kind of being my normal light bouncy self, I might say, "Hey, we can't keep doing that. We need to go do this or this." And at that point, we also want to offer two choices to the person. And this has a lot of reason. There's a lot of logic and rules to offering choices that I'm really hoping everyone kind of takes to heart. One, the first rule of offering choices, there can't be a right and a wrong choice if you're really offering a choice. There's a huge difference between, hey, you can get out of my office or I'll call the police, you pick. I feel like there's a right and a wrong option at that point. I'm hoping most people aren't going to go, you know what, call the police. That's what I want. That's not giving them a real choice at that point. They also have to be two things that matter to the person. If you have a person who absolutely despises a group activity. So we say we're offering people a group activity at work. Hey, do you want to go golfing or do you want to go to a rage room together? And you know one of the people hates golf with an absolute passion. Have you really given that person an actual choice at the end of the day? I'm going to argue you haven't. Because you're picking, hey, do you want to go do this thing that you really hate and don't want to do? Or do you want to do something you might feel more, at least ambivalent about, if not excited about? And then three, and this is the one that I laugh about as a parent. We have to give two choices where we're not going to get mad regardless of what they pick. It's something that I've seen people do a lot where they'll offer choices to somebody and then they get really mad at that person for whatever they've picked. Well, one, why are we offering it if we're going to get mad? We've got to pick something that we can all live with. And two, we're helping somebody exercise their free will and their voice. We want people to have voice. Voice is so important to every single human being. We don't want to strip people of that voice. So why are we wanting to tell someone, hey, we want you to have voice, but don't you use it in a way I don't like? That's going to have such a negative impact on that person. It's going to devalue, make them feel less valued. It's going to make them feel like they can't say things when it matters to them. And then sometimes things still escalate. Sometimes the person still does not feel heard. And at that point, I think we usually move up to that high defensive state. And this is where things start getting a little dicey for us, I think. This is the point where we're starting to get a little more worried about what's going to happen next. The person's probably getting louder. They're probably getting aggressive in their tone, so they're trying to have that threat in there. The difference of, hey, we can't do that, and we're not doing that. As soon as you introduce a growl, you threaten a person. Hopefully, we all know we don't do that. From an HR perspective, it's not good to threaten your coworkers. I'm hoping everyone here knew that. If not, we should have a talk about this later. So that's probably slipping in at this point. At this point, they may start kind of trying to knock some stuff off of a table. They're probably invading your personal space, or I mean, at least the very least, leaning over you in an uncomfortable way. And they're definitely trying to make you feel like you could be in danger if you don't give them what they need. Now, at this point, we're going to use two different strategies once again. One, we're going to use a very firm voice. And I know that may sound like a bit of a pedantic nitpick between firm and very firm. Uh, but as somebody with a toddler, I can absolutely assure you there is a huge difference between going, hey, baby, I need you to pick up the puzzle, and hey, I need you to pick up that puzzle in the way she's going to respond. And it's true in the workplace. One of the things you'll probably hear me talk about a lot is I work with kids a lot. I've been a preschool teacher, I've been a classroom teacher, I work at a children's home, and I'm around teenagers and children all the time. And some people may not think that that translates to using this with adults, but it absolutely does because people are people. People are people. And I have so often found that as adults, we still want people to treat us with the same dignity and respect that we should treat children. I found that really adults want us to be playful. And I find that adults have the same escalatory type behaviors that children do because people are people. So if you hear me say something about a kid or relate some stories to children, well, that's because that's what I spend most of my time working around and helping coach people with. But these are all techniques that I still use in the workplace. In fact, some of the phrases that I teach people from this, on occasion, they'll come back to me later on after we've trained them and they'll go, "You used those words on me." And I go, "Yeah, I did. How'd that make you feel?" And they'll go, "It made me feel good. Thanks." So while we're in this phase, that very firm voice, maybe dropping our octave just a little bit, but not growling. That is still incredibly important. And then we're going to do what is categorized as a time in. And this is going to be really different for the workplace than it is in the usual application I put this in. But I find that a time in is actually a really beautiful moment where we can offer connection to people. And what this is going to look like, maybe we're in a meeting and we notice somebody starting to get really, really dysregulated. Maybe something's happened in the meeting, somebody's upset. And instead of just kicking them out of the meeting and saying, "Hey, you're not in the best state of mind you possibly could be, get away from us until you're in the headspace where you can sort it out." What if? What if we tried going out with them and saying, "Hey, what do we have going on? Why are we so upset? What do we need to feel better in this moment?" And I know that sounds silly, but I am absolutely convinced that in the English language, one of the most powerful words that any of us can use, especially in this day and age, is the word we. Because people are so desperately seeking connection. We live in a world that claims to be more connected than it ever has been before. But is that really how we feel as a people? And in spending a lot of time in online spaces and working around people, I'm finding more and more people are feeling increasingly isolated as things progress the way they are. So, what can the word we do for someone? We don't know a lot about people's pasts all the time. We don't know what they've been through. We don't necessarily know what they are currently going through. I work at a trauma-informed agency, and we always try to remember that people are going through something and people have been through stuff all the time. And trauma changes the way we see the world. It changes how we respond. It changes how we react to just about any situation. How do we know in that moment that something horrible hadn't happened to that person in that meeting? And it reminded them, something was said in the meeting, and it reminded them of one of the worst moments of their entire life. And that starts getting them into survival mode, that starts putting them in fight or flight. So what if, instead of saying, "Hey, you, what's wrong with you, you, what if we could take that moment to say, we're a team, we're partners, we can get through this together." I find that not only does that often help de-escalate a situation, but so much more than that. I found that it can actually help people start a healing process that they didn't even know they needed. And I've used this on the adults I work with, and it led to some really powerful moments between that person and myself. And I got to see that person starting to work through a healing process, and they came back later on and they told me their story. If you really want to know a human being, sit down, look at them in the eyes, and say, "Hey, can you tell me your story?" And I think you can I think you can get a really beautiful perspective on a human being in that moment by asking someone what their story is. But unfortunately, sometimes, despite our best attempts at cooling the temperature of the room and trying to de-escalate the situation, sometimes things will escalate even further. And then we get to the storm, and that's kind of the worst possible thing that could be happening in this moment. I don't, this is something I usually need to specifically cover. This is the part where people are yelling and screaming and cussing or, whatever that may possibly look like. And there's a few options we have at this point. One, we're past the point of logic, and I'm going to stop screen sharing for just a minute so we can just talk about it. Um, we're past the point of just being able to have that rational conversation. This person is in full-blown fight or flight mode. Now, when I'm talking about fight or flight mode, there's two parts of the brain we need to talk about, and we can work some just really basic human biology into this that I think will help recontextualize these situations for a lot of people. So you don't even need to turn your webcam on for me. If everyone can at least make an effort to hold your hand up in front of you like this is going to represent your brain. Now go ahead and tuck in your thumb, and this represents your amygdala. Is anyone here familiar with what the amygdala does? Christopher, I saw a very enthusiastic yes. Christopher Maxwell, I believe. Do you wanna talk to us about the amygdala for just a minute so people don't have to hear me yap the whole time?
Uh, yeah, sure, why not? In my own words, I know as a part of your brain, also called like the reptilian part of your brain that deals with that fight, flight, freeze, reaction that you have in the body, um, and the glands that come out to cause that reaction, for yourself.
Christopher, if I had a gold star, I'd send it to you. Fantastic work. So that is right down here near the base of your skull, which is we're representing with where our thumb is currently. Now, if you wrap your fingers over it, this is representing your frontal lobe. Does anybody know what our frontal lobe is in charge of? Christopher, I saw that smile. I have suspicions.
I don't want to hog all the time. I want somebody else to have the opportunity to. Logic and reasoning. There you go. Reasoning in the chat.
So yeah, this is where our good decisions come from, right? So the problem is these two things can't drive us at the same time. Hopefully, this is how most of us are walking around throughout our day, right? But when something happens, when fight or flight triggers, our body kind of tends to kick it out the window, and now we're back to that fight or flight center being in control of the body. So, this is actually a signal that we teach a lot of our employees here, and sometimes, like, you'll actually see the employees around here look at each other and kind of go to help signal to each other, "Hey, someone's in fight or flight mode. Like, we got to handle this differently." And it's because when we are in fight or flight, when we're feeling the need to survive, we don't need to make as rational of a decision in the moment. If I am being chased by a bear, the last thing I want to do is have an internal philosophical debate about this bear. I want to move faster than the bear. I want to climb faster, higher than the bear. I want to be able to escape this thing. I don't want to go, I wonder what led my life up to the moment where I'm being chased by a bear. Is that bear indigenous to this region? Now, folks, I'm from the St. Louis area. I don't expect to see a lot of bears around here. We did have one go down the highway last year around where I live, and that was the most exciting thing that's ever happened out there, I'm pretty sure. But I don't need to have clear, rational thought about the bear necessarily. I just need to survive. And that happens. The other thing that we need to consider is that if we're working with someone who's been through PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, they actually have found in some scans that the amygdala, so that part of our brain controlling our survival instincts, is actually physiologically larger and more connected into our brain than it normally would, which means it's easier to turn it on and it's harder to turn it off. So that's why when we are at this point where even at that high defensiveness point, people are starting to lose that rational decision because they are going into fight or flight mode. And we're probably going into fight or flight mode as well. That's why in session one, we talked a lot about regulatory techniques for us personally to help us get calm and help us try to kind of bring that lid back down so that we can be driving with that frontal lobe again. Christopher, thank you so much for helping with that. I do appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone appreciates getting to hear a different voice for a little while as well. Um, so during the storm, the problem is there's only oh yeah, I see the chat. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for saying reasoning. During the storm, we're not going to be able to go, hey, you're not being very logical right now. What if you try doing something else? That person's not going to hear you. They're just not going to hear that. Now, there's kind of two things we can do at this point. If it's possible and if it's appropriate, we can try to make that person feel heard in that moment. Hey, I see you're hurting, and I am. I'm so sorry. I can see you're really, really going through this. And I see you and I hear you. And I find that as a reaction will spend more, well, it'll do more to de-escalate a situation than increasing your voice. If anyone's ever worked in retail, you know exactly what I'm talking about. As soon as a customer starts threatening you, if you let them feel seen and heard, how much quicker does that make that transaction go? It's true in the office. So much in life is true in so many places, and yet I don't feel like we're often enough connecting all of these ideas together. Beyond that, the other thing we can do, and we always want to remember, if we have to get the police involved, we have to get the police involved. Generally, our guidelines are if someone's in danger and you can't get people to stop fighting, get the police involved. Let them be the ones who have that connection damage. But we want to remember, if we can avoid it, we want to try to take care of things ourselves because we're still trying to maintain connection every chance we possibly get. And we say this because I don't know a whole lot of people where when you've called the police on them, they go, "Huh, thank you. I needed that. I was really out of line and you helped me a ton. Thank you." But once again, in the workplace, sometimes we just have to. Now, fortunately, I have never had to call the police on a coworker. Usually, we can get people de-escalated way before this point. And other times, sometimes you just need to let people have their storm. I think we can all think of a point at least once in our career where we have been the one who was angry and upset and hurt and not doing our best. And if we could just vent a little bit, we would have felt a lot better. Sometimes we got to get the storm out. And if we can do that safely, absolutely. I keep for anyone who ever who visits my office, I have an axe throwing set up in my office so that when people are really upset and not doing well, sometimes they'll come visit me and they will in my office. Now they are rubber axes. We don't throw metal axes in my office, but they will just come over here to throw axes for a while and to get out that burst of whatever negative thing they're feeling in that moment. But the good news is, especially if I'm assuming most of you are from the Midwest, for all of my Midwesterners here, we all know that no matter how bad the storm is, the storm does eventually end. And when a storm ends, we always want to try to take the time to process what's happened with the individual. Now, after crisis care, I think is one of the most important things we can ever do when it comes to helping people grow and helping people heal. I'm hoping that every single person here who works with another human being wants to see the people around you grow and succeed and just do better in general. So our after crisis care, we're going to take care of three different versions of the same person because in everything we do, whenever we're trying to help someone, we're actually not just helping one version of that person. We're always helping three versions of that person. And so after an incident has happened, after something has happened, even if it's just somebody gets really anxious, we want to start doing some after crisis care. And what we're going to do, we're going to focus on their present, their past, and their future. Now, I don't say them in that order because I'm really bad at time sequencing. I promise you I'm fairly decent at time sequencing by this point in my life. But it's because we have to start in the present. We have to start in the now to make sure that everyone's okay and ready to talk about whatever it is that happened, to make sure that the next two stages can go smoothly. So one of the things we have to do, we have to one, we've got to make sure that person is currently regulated because if we're trying to talk about the other two parts that we need to talk about here, we might accidentally make the situation a bit worse or get them right back into that previous stage they were at, if not elevated from where they were. And two, though, and this is the one most people forget, we have to be regulated as well. Because if we're not regulated, if we are not in that right place, I almost guarantee you we are going to end up making the situation so much worse. So we need to make sure we're okay. We need to make sure they're okay before we can actually sit down and have this conversation. Because we want to talk about the past. And we're going to talk about the past in a few different ways. I want to know from this person's perspective what happened. Sometimes as supervisors, we think we know exactly what the cause of an incident was. We think we know exactly what happened, and we've missed something. Maybe it's, oh, they're just responding to this thing that was just said in a meeting, but it's not. Maybe it was something somebody said to them in the hallway earlier that kind of started this chain of events in motion. Maybe it's something that happened during the last meeting that got this person set on a more negative trajectory, and this meeting kind of dredged up those thoughts and feelings in that person again. What happened in the past that's impacting them now is the other half of what we have to talk about. So with that person, I'm trying to find out the who, what, where, when, why, how, all of that good stuff about what they perceive as having happened, about why this incident occurred. But I also want to try to figure out, hey, has this happened in the past with this person before? Do I know something about this person that maybe caused them that pain that caused this incident? Do I know this coworker of mine has been through a traumatic event and somebody made a fairly flippant joke about that traumatic event, or not necessarily that specific traumatic event, but a joke around it? Or maybe somebody said something and that term or phrase caused a lot of pain for that individual. Well, we can start working around that. Now, one of my other jobs I've done at one point, I used to work with adults with intellectual disabilities. And we had a client who, believe it or not, one of his major triggers became the country of Switzerland. Now, for everyone who just kind of scrunched at the camera a little bit confused, let me talk to you about why it became important. Where, as somebody trying to help this individual, why I understood their past. Because most of us probably aren't particularly bothered by the country of Switzerland. Great chocolates, great pocket knives, great watches, and just incredibly neutral of a country. Before this individual was born, their dad took off. They never met their father. And they spent their whole life seeking out that specific connection with this human that they didn't know. And on his 30th birthday, he gets a letter in the mail. Dear son, moved to Zurich with your new stepmother. Hope you can meet us someday. Sent you a birthday present. And in that present was a welcome to Switzerland tourist package. You know what I'm talking about with the like the snow globes and the calendar. All of it just says like welcome to Switzerland, a pen. I think there was like a little chocolate in there or something. And at first, this gentleman was really excited about this prospect. He's like, "Oh man, I get to finally meet my dad. This is really exciting." But then, as time went on, he started getting angrier and angrier and angrier to the point where anytime somebody said anything around him, he was probably going to be pretty mad. And another person I worked with went, "Hey, this all started the day that package showed up. What happens if we just like stick all that stuff in a drawer and go about our day? Let's see what happens." Well, the next day, somebody did that, and almost immediately that individual was back to their normal, bright, bubbly, kind of fun self. So I pose to you all, did that individual actually have any issues with the country of Switzerland? I'm hoping the answer was no. No, thank you, Antonio. Yeah, the answer is no. It had nothing to do with that, but it had to do with the feelings of abandonment he had felt his whole life. And we can see how that feeling was starting to seep into his every moment of every day. It was affecting him at work. Because whenever he would see anyone with, especially with a familial bond, it was kind of triggering that idea, and the country of Switzerland became associated with it. So, how often does that happen to the people around us, though? How often are people where we are in the spaces we occupy seeing something that reminds them of a horrible pain, and we're going, hey, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting that way? If you all want to know how I define caring about people's trauma, being trauma informed, I think it comes down to daily with violence. Stephanie, I have a lot of questions for you. We might have to talk about this more. If if we're wanting to talk about being trauma informed, I think there's two different questions that define what being trauma informed is versus isn't. I think if you aren't thinking about trauma whenever something like this happens, we are simply asking the question, what's wrong with you? But if we want to be trauma informed, if we want to care about humans and what humans go through and what they're dealing with, we're going to start asking the question, what happened to you? And I think when we start asking, hey, what happened to you? We start seeing people in a very different perspective. And all of this, working with their present to look at their past, is also because we should care an awful lot about people's futures. Hopefully, we care enough about the people around us to not only care about them if they work with us specifically. And that's something I'm very fortunate about working in a fairly small agency is that sometimes when people leave, I still get to stay in contact with them. But I, as somebody who used to supervise some of these people, I care about how they're doing when they're not with me anymore. I want to see them go on to have successful careers and to do well with their lives. I want to see the kids that we work with when they're no longer in our care grow up and be successful and do really, really well in their lives. Let's see here. People in our communities that are affected by violence and triggered by overwhelming violence in Chicago. Yes, absolutely. I feel that, Stephanie, especially being in St. Louis, that's something we need to be particularly aware of, right? Is that we are working around a lot of trauma, and if it's not overt, if I haven't been the immediate victim of that violence, I'm still on edge because I could be, depending on where I am at any given point in time. So we need to start being aware. Hey, my coworker, you know what? They were just in an area and they may have gone through something pretty rough recently, and they are going to have a trauma response when that happens. Stephanie, absolutely, especially in metro areas where this can happen. And then you see it on the news, and then you think, hey, you know what? I'm not as safe when I go to my office as I would like to be. Oh, hey, I have to go to this location. You know what? I may not be as safe as I would like to be. Well, that can be traumatizing. That can be incredibly traumatizing for individuals. And really, all of this processing, caring about what they've been through, caring about where they are, it's to work on that future, though. And I'm going to challenge people that if you can only care about the people around you in the moment, where if they don't work with me, you know what? I don't care about any of these people, whatever. I'm gonna challenge everyone to really take a look at the fact that these aren't just numbers and they're not just positions that we're working with. These are all human beings. They go home, they have families, they have thoughts, they have feelings, they have goals, they have aspirations, they have dreams. This isn't just this person in this position. This is a unique individual that will never exist again at any other point in time. This is a person who relies on us to help support them, to help support families, to help support anyone else they may support in the workplace. And then they go home and they use that money from work to hopefully help support other people or themselves. We're never just dealing with a person with a blank face, with a person without a soul for us to care about. And I think when we start investing in the human beings around us, I think it gets a lot easier to deal with situations. And the other reason we're going to start caring about this future bit is because even though we all want to get along, we're human beings, we're flawed, we have our moments, we have our days. It's inevitable we're not always going to be able to get along with everyone. It's just not possible. And we want to start future proofing further incidents. So this is where we need to be able to have a very real conversation with that human. We want to be able to say, hey, when stuff was going on, can you tell me what I did that helped you feel better? But then, and this is where when I mentioned we need to be in a good place where this really needs to be there. We need to be able to have an honest conversation with this person and say, hey, what did I do that made the situation worse? What could I improve on helping you in the future? And that gets really hard for some people because even though we sometimes we do everything we can, we accidentally do make a situation worse. So we need to be able to just accept, hey, this is what you did that made me more angry and say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry. I can try to do better in the future. I'm going to adjust the way I respond as the person with the training and the experience instead of demanding that you completely change everything about you. I can change. I can help that person do better in the future. Now, we are trying to help them do better, but we need to be part of that equation. We need to be part of that team. That's not always easy. I'll never forget. I was also a gym coach for the youth I was working with that were incarcerated, and there was one day I was putting all the equipment up, and the way this program works is that all of the boys in this program they have to move together. They're not allowed to be separated, and they have staff that kind of takes them from classroom to classroom and activity to activity. Well, I as the coach, I was putting up all the equipment and stuff, and their staff was lining them up and getting ready to take them away. And I just hear, you know what? I'm not moving again. And it was just this angry shouting. I popped my head in, and a kid has sat down. Now the problem we had is that gym was right before lunch, and if you've ever worked with teenagers, folks, oh my goodness, they only care about one thing after they've had a good hard gym class, and that's usually food. And this kid sits down, and he does not talk again. And everyone in that room is trying really hard to try to get him to talk. He won't move, so none of the other kids can move. And at first, the other 12 young men in there with him, they're doing so incredibly well to try to help and be supportive of him. And eventually, after 2 hours of trying to get this person to open up and communicate, he finally says, hey, it made me really mad when the staff said, and I couldn't understand what he said at that point. And the staff just goes, well, you know what? That's not how I meant it. And barks it at this young man. 2 hours later, when this kid finally spoke again, school had been over for an hour and we still hadn't moved from that spot. The other young men were getting hungry enough. They were talking about like eating the kid. And if you, that's only kind of a joke, but they were actually talking about seasonings at that point. So I was getting a little worried for his safety. But it's all because that person who was needing to communicate and apologize for their actions, they weren't regulated. They weren't in a place to be able to go, hey, you know what? I'm the person with all this extra training. You know what? I think I can just say, hey, I'm sorry, I can make an adjustment. Thank you, everyone, for attending part two of Verbal De-Escalation. Once again, if you haven't seen part one, I strongly suggest you go back and check that out. We have a lot of self-regulatory techniques and some other foundational stuff that I did cover in that session. Thank you all so much for your time and for your energy listening to what we had to talk about today. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that you're able to take something back with you to your workplace to hopefully help make your work environment something substantially more positive.